Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Joy, Resistance, Hope, and Survival Book Club and Support Group on 22 panels. We don't have any of our psychologists here to officially run the support group, so it's more of an informal support group tonight. Um, 4th of July weekend, they want to do family stuff, and I let them. I think I'm required to. They're my boss. But whatever. What we do have is we have uh, regular contributors Brit Payne and Ryan Carey joining us. I think for the first time together. Brit is the head of the nonprofit The Autism Scene. Ryan is a writer at Four Color Apocalypse on Patreon, and um, occasionally the Comics Journal. And we have my mother, Julie, for the first time since Ramon Perez was on. And just for fun, we have the author of the book, Mr. R. Sikoryak. And what we're discussing, because, it's timely as we record on the day after the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States. We're discussing Constitution Illustrated and the newly released Declaration Illustrated flip book with Emancipation Illustrated. So, good evening, everybody. We will start with the typical just check in. How is everybody doing right now? How was your week? How are you feeling? Because this is the support group, even if we're informal support group today. Everybody's smiling at me, and nobody's
There,
nobody's
there.
volunteering.
So as we record, it's 4th of July weekend, and it has been an extremely interesting 4th of July for a lot of reasons. It's the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. I remember vividly how enchanted I was as a 6-year-old by the bicentennial when I lived near Philadelphia. I was in New Jersey, and we got this wonderful gift in a challenging time politically, which was the World Cup. I don't particularly care about soccer, um, but I think it was wonderful to hear all of the reactions of the people who visited the States and found it to be magical in contrast to the headlines and what they expected to find when they got here based on the stories. And it felt like this wonderful, hopefully lasting moment of blasting through the the sort of fog of unpleasantness. It reminded me a little bit of long last have you no decency, a moment that hopefully will break the fever and contribute to maybe turning a corner, because it really was. I think it has been wonderful, to a great way to feel proud about our country and to feel good about ourselves and our lives in a way that can be challenging if we are paying too much attention to the headlines.
Right? Ryan, Bob, Mom.
Well, I can't top that, so I won't even try. I think I'm not much into this World Cup stuff. My brother's real big into it, so I've been checking out a little of it. But you know, these soccer fans will drive you a little nuts, won't they? I mean, they act like their game is this pure great thing, but half of these games are pretty boring. People talk about being bored by baseball, but Christ, some of this some of this soccer gets a little dull. And I mean, FIFA, from what I understand, is arguably the single most corrupt organization in the entire world. But what the hell, people are having a good time, and I'm not against anybody having fun.
You
So
gotta love that the Scots managed to drink Boston out of beer.
you know what, that is admirable, you're right.
I mean, and took over Fenway Park for a night.
Wow.
Um, yeah, no, it's always a weird week in America today, but I've gotten to have a lot of cool conversations this week. One of the advantages of when I'm on my summer break is I have more time to talk to people overseas or that work during the day or like Bob have the most time to talk late at night. Um, so this has been a cool week for conversations for me. So overall I'm good, though I also helped somebody move in the heat and then the rain on Friday night, and I'm still recovering
Oh
from
yeah, I
that.
heard about that one.
That's right, because Daria helped too.
Yeah, I heard
You
about that one.
you are a good friend. Helping somebody move, that's one of the kindest things you can do. You're a good friend.
Yeah. So that was my week. We're looking at Mom and Bob.
Well, mine was
Who's gonna?
pretty boring.
Pretty boring.
Pretty same
You're
old, same old.
same. You're retired now. You're supposed to be reading more and doing fun stuff.
I'm reading more.
Okay.
I'm doing same old because I don't have any other same old to do.
Well,
Fair
one
enough.
look at your bookshelf there, and we know where your kid got his love for reading.
Oh yeah, that's just the top two shelves.
Yeah, 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 yeah. We believe in bookshelves in every room in this family. All
Yeah.
right, Bob, how's your week been? You had a book come out this week.
I did. Came out on June 30th. I wish it came out on June 19th, but we'll get to that. But I was very late. I'm glad we squeaked it into the July 4th weekend as it was. I went down to Philadelphia to do a book signing at Brave New Worlds, which is a great comic shop in Philadelphia, and I had a nice turnout in 100-degree heat. And then we stayed the next day to see everybody dressed in costumes and all their red, white, and blue regalia, and it was pretty amusing to be down there. I would not have gone if it were not uh, so close to my book signing,
All right.
but it was pretty charming to actually see all the buildings that I'd been drawing for a year in person when I went down there. So we had a very nice time, and I'm glad I touched the ground there this weekend.
So, I'm generally asked by somebody why I pick the books for joy, resistance, hope, and survival, and it's always to try to find books that hit on at least a couple of those themes. But when I saw that this one was going to be right around the fourth, I picked these two books because I think between the facts that I think that our founding documents are among the best parts of our country. We haven't always lived up to them, but like the
Mhm.
fact that some of this stuff got put on paper as something to aspire to, I actually find quite beautiful. Um, but also the way Bob has given a nice history lesson, a comics history lesson in terms of
Mhm.
pages of pastiches and good notes at the end to find out like where everything came from.
Mhm.
But also each page kind of encourages you to stop and think about, okay, what is this picture saying about the words? How should I look more holistically at these words? Because the founding documents are also legal documents, and as I'm certain Brit can attest to, sometimes with legal documents, they become less interesting reads because they've got to word things really carefully and therefore like when you're just reading them without splitting them up into chunks, I know that like I told Bob the last time he was on that I've been reading the Constitution like minimum once a year since I was like 12. But the first time I read it this way was the first time that I'd had to really slow down and read it and think about it more. And I'd notice things, I'd notice nuances, I'd notice, oh, wait, that's a big hole that somebody's going to drive a Mack truck through someday. And then you learn history. It's like, oh yeah, somebody did drive a Mack truck through. And then it drives you to constitutional history and go, oh, they knew that that was a big hole. They just couldn't agree on how to fill it, which is why they have things like Article 5 and the Ninth Amendment. It's to say, hey, this isn't complete. This is what we have today. Bob and I talked on Tuesday night about Ben Rhodes' new book, and I started listening to it. And the very first speech in it is the one that Benjamin Franklin gave at the Constitutional Convention. And while it acknowledges that there were parts of the Constitution that he didn't agree with, what he was arguing to everybody, and this was before there was even a Bill of Rights amended or addended to it, was that we need to accept this document as is. No, it is not perfect, but if we keep trying to, we will never be able to agree on too many of the things that we disagree on. So we need to just move forward. Um, and there's a certain beauty to that.
Mhm.
And so yeah, that's why I picked the books is like every time I am really depressed about this country, I remember that we're, if not the only, one of very few countries that have such a wonderful vision of what could be. Individuals have that vision, but to have it written down, I think is kind of special to have it in speeches throughout. I mean, I'm so glad that along with Emancipation Proclamation, you also included the Gettysburg Address, which Gettysburg Address and Lincoln's second inaugural are essentially like the refounding of this nation, you know.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, that was why I picked it. Anybody have opening thoughts on what they thought of the books?
I work with some great writers, and I don't, and I don't, I don't, I don't know if they knew or could possibly know what they unleashed. And what I liked thinking about while I was doing it was how we have to keep reinterpreting them. I'm so glad I had the time to add the emancipation to the book because I felt that Lincoln starts to like reshape what we thought the Declaration meant.
Right.
And I love having that conversation in history. And you can only imagine what the next part of the book, if I could do a four-sided book, what the next two parts of the book would be that would
Right.
re-envision what to take those initial words and see how else you could expand their meaning.
I have fun figuring out which drawings I recognize.
That's often my favorite part of these kinds of books.
Yeah.
That was why I reached out to you, Ryan. I reached out to you largely because I went, "Ooh, this is the person I know who's going to recognize the most of these." But also, living in Minneapolis, I imagine you've had to think about some of this stuff even more than we have over the last year. So I was curious to get both of those viewpoints. Um,
Well, I
because
mean, the viewpoint of Minneapolis is that they're using the Constitution as toilet paper.
Yeah.
About what it boils down to. I mean, I think that's pretty much, that's not even overly cynical.
no,
That's basically day to day life here these last, certainly earlier this year, but, those guys are still in town a little bit. They're not doing as much, but it's not like they all left.
right.
It's also not a new way to treat the Constitution. If you look back through history, the last 250 years, or it's fewer than 250 for the Constitution, but still, um, you'll see that there have been plenty of times when people who you might agree with today and you might not agree with today danced around the Constitution, its original intent, and its actual words to advance their political agenda. Again, whether it's something that some of those we would say, boy, it's about time they fixed that. And some of them we would say, oh, how horrible that was that happened, where they also ignored the Constitution. So the value, I'm curious to know from your, obviously spending a lot of time with the actual text of the original founding document that, as Tad put, we built this whole thing on. To what extent did you find that the words themselves were moving? And to what extent did you find that the story it told and the example that it set of how to deal with the real world and how to put that into something that we could relate to, which is obviously your point in making cartoons. How did you develop that relationship with what the Constitution was, and what did you kind of come out of it having you feel differently than when you started?
Well, certainly speaking for the new book, I don't remember having read all the grievances when I was a kid. Unlike Tad, I didn't I hadn't memorized the Declaration. So
I
the
didn't
resonance.
memorize the Declaration. It was the Emancipation that I had memorized.
Okay, all right, fair enough. But I think, you can't help but see the resonance of a lot of the grievances today. That was really striking to me.
Oh,
I think when you when you try to write something with a little poetry, the poetry can speak to you beyond time. And I, I I struggle with the racist portions of it. I struggle with the compromises in it. Um, but it's like they knew better, but they weren't going to do anything about it, or they couldn't get everyone to agree to do anything about it. Um,
Some of
and
them knew better.
they all should have known better. But in any case, they didn't. They weren't able to put it into practice for whatever reason. Uh, it's what's great about the Constitution is it sort of says you can keep amending this. So, that was that acknowledgement from the beginning, and I really appreciated it was maybe more prominent for me in the Constitution to sense that as I go through history, the parts that are problematic are some of them are resolved as we go forward. And I liked thinking about them as a chronology of a reading experience because it's not like we threw out the old Constitution. It's still there. It's still part of it. So we're still kind of acknowledging and staring at the flaws from the beginning, even as there's amendments later on. If you can stick around long enough, you'll get to the better parts. And I think the Declaration has a little bit of that, again, like juxtaposed with the Civil War era documents. So I think it helped me recognize that these are still living documents, and to hear politicians talk about the Declaration now, we can't live like they suggest in that document, and sort of trying to rewrite that history is kind of shocking, but people will keep doing that. And I think that's one of the reasons using different styles made sense to me, because different characters that I represent would have different viewpoints. Mallard Fillmore is in the Declaration, and I know Mallard Fillmore's politics are not mine. Mallard is the duck, and I might agree more with other artists or many of the other artists, but or I should say characters. I should say characters. Some characters don't express the views of their creators, but I really wanted to make sure that the book acknowledged those issues that I'm dealing with, but also still trying to bring all these voices and styles together to suggest we're all here. I guess on some level we have to get used to it, even if we don't want to accept it. We have to deal with each other in the meantime. Was that coherent? That was a very good question, and I'm afraid I
thought it was coherent.
It was.
Okay, great. Thank you.
What artists were you excited to match up with what provisions of either the Declaration or the Constitution or the Proclamation?
Oh, well, some came to me right away. I would also say, because I had done the Constitution book earlier, I vowed not to repeat any of the artists who were in here, which was a bit of a struggle because there would be characters I wanted to include who I didn't want to redraw in the new version, but many of the comic book characters and so many of the comic strip characters have been reinvented by succeeding artists that I felt I could go back to the well if I was dealing with someone who had different iterations. So one of the obvious ones in the book, which occurred to me pretty early on, was there's a line about the king dissolving the representative houses in America, and I quickly came upon Thanos snapping his fingers as people were dissolving. So that, like, if you can find a visual cue like that, especially one that a lot of people know about, even though it came from the comics, so many people saw the films. That was like a great visual echo to play with. As far as like just drawing styles, I really like playing with old comic strip styles. So I love working in that era, but it's fun to take on a challenge. Like the Emil Ferris page was very challenging. I had tried to fit in her characters in the previous book, and it was only until I found the right page this time around that I went back to her. But that was a struggle to sort of capture that like cross-hatching color development that she does. The way that she builds color builds form out of different colors was difficult for me, but I knew it would make a striking page, and I was excited to do that one.
Mm-hmm.
And I really tried to represent a gamut. And the earliest characters in this book are from 1903, and the most recent characters are from 2024, 2025. So I really wanted to deal with the breadth of comics. And
Yeah, I
I mean, it was fun.
noticed some of that. Obviously I could pick out all the well, there was no direct Kirby ones in the new book, but there was plenty of the bastardized Kirby that we got from 70s Marvel, like the John Byrne Terry Austin supervillain team up cover. That's a famous one. That Silver Surfer thing you had going. So those are always fun for me. But then some of the and then I just love that you had Pete Bagg and Mark Beyer in there, because they're two of my all-time favorite cartoonists. You had the famous Dark Side thing by Keith Giffen from Legion of Superheroes, so that was another Kirby clone type of thing.
For sure.
But then some of it, is more contemporary, like YA looking stuff that that's for a decidedly younger crowd than me, but they'll get a kick out of it, I'm sure.
Well, that was the hope, that anyone who saw it would recognize somebody.
Yeah.
I wanted people to feel like they were in it too. And it is really fun for me because a lot of my fans are older comics fans. But when I see a young kid come up to my table and recognize that I included the Wimpy Kid on the cover, or I included the Babysitters Club characters from the new book, I'm really trying to make sure people go like, this isn't just for one type of fan. Now, I realize by including everyone, it probably will confuse some folks that aren't used to the history, but I'm hoping that there's at least something people go like, oh yeah, I remember that. So whether they're reading it now or they read it 50 years ago or somewhere in between.
Much of that was new research.
All your bases covered.
Yeah, he did give the 10th Amendment to Kirby.
Yeah. Like I said, I couldn't go back to Kirby.
Only once per artist.
And I had to find a Conan not drawn by John Buscema, who would have also been a possible choice.
Right.
So yeah, Ryan, there was a lot of like negotiating characters and what iterations to use of them.
Well, Darkseid and Thanos, you can't lose.
How much research did you have to do for the newer artists? Like, were you already reading Babysitters Club or relatively aware of it? Or were you like, what's hot now? Let me read that so that I can include it.
It's a little bit of both. I mean, I read Raina Telgemeier, so I was familiar with those from when she started that series, but I had done a Raina in the Constitution. So like, well, I can't do Raina again, but there's other people that took over that series. So some of it is a matter of doing research. I often go to bookstores or comic shops and just look around, see what's popular. I look at bestseller lists to see what's popular. I had to put Dogman in here, for instance, maybe the top selling comic of all time, at least in America. So there's always research, but then there's research going back. I included Skippy, which was a huge comic strip from the 1920s, which has not been reprinted that much. There are a few volumes that came out recently, but it's almost like a pre-Peanuts kids comic, because it's these like very precocious kids having street fights, but also philosophical conversations. I mean, you can totally see where Schultz got inspired by these characters, but I can't remember if it was Comics Kingdom or Go Comics, but these are two sites that have newspaper comics, and you can go through the archives. And one of those sites, I'm embarrassed to say, I can't remember which syndicate his was, but one of those sites has years and years of Skippy from the 1920s. So I was able to like look through every episode and find
check that out.
Yeah, it's fantastic. They have Crazy Cat, they have Thimble Theater. It's such a great resource. They don't have every strip, but like there's a number of 30 strips they have. Yeah, it's Go Comics and Comics Kingdom. I'm always recommending them. And a lot of the new artists are there too. So a lot of new newspaper comics I will follow there. So I'm always looking at stuff.
He
Yeah.
he has totally sold me on subscriptions to both. I have subscriptions to both.
If it's
Um,
they're very affordable. And
yeah, they're not that expensive.
it's a great way to get pretty nice copies too. I mean, these are clean scans of the old art in most cases.
Right.
But that's where I found the Julia Jones pages. That's where I've probably found Alley Oop. Where did I find Alley Oop? I was probably on their site. Maybe it was one of the
I,
IDW
I
books.
know Alley Oop is on one of them.
Okay, so
I,
maybe
I'm
that's
I'm
what.
I'm I'm looking for Skippy as we speak.
Yeah.
I
Skippy's
figure it's my
great.
job to answer questions like this.
Skippy is fantastic. So, um, anyway, these books give me an excuse to research, and I'm happy to do that. And I try to look at everything. I mean, I look at everything more than I read everything, but I try to sort of get a sense of what's happening, and the evolution of comics is always exciting to me. So it's it's been fun. Now, I would also say for this book, um, I wanted to make sure I had famous characters that I hadn't included in the Constitution. That made me research, was there ever a Family Guy comic book? Like, that's a character everyone would know. And it turns out there were 3 or 4 issues of a Family Guy comic in the 2000s. So I was like, all right, that
You're
qualifies.
in.
'Cause I did not want to start drawing from animation stills because I thought that just opens up the field so much. Like, that's just a whole other, like, just for my brain to not explode, I had to just kind of limit it to print media or, web print, web comics. So rather than move into animation, I was like, all right, these exist as comic strips, which is how I got the Lion King in there and Rugrats. These were syndicated strips as well after the animated films or movies. I mean, shows.
So
So
I will quickly say Skippy from Percy Crosby is on Go Comics.
okay, thank you.
Thought it was really fun to think about how modern this is. This is going to be a little bit of a long bit, but I read a lot. I've been reading comic books since about 1974, 75, and a lot of them were educational, as you can imagine. The Golden Legacy stuff, the Martin Luther King comic books that
Great.
inspired, John Lewis, the 1976, there were all kinds of, and in 1989, when it was the 200th anniversary of the Constitution itself. And George Perez did this insert that went into the Yale Daily News that was
Oh, I
Superman.
found that. I found
Right?
that. That's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Isn't that cool? Yeah, that's a good
so
one, right?
cool.
And then
It's
Spidey
Superman
Super
going
Stories.
back to the writing of the Constitution.
Yeah, and then I think Spider-Man and Captain America did something similar over in Spidey Super Stories, also during the bicentennial. Oh no, actually during the bicentennial, and certainly there have been a lot of comic books, and there are children's books even that try to illustrate the Constitution, make it more understandable. And what they do is they tend to break it down, they modernize the language, they sort of eliminate parts of it and focus on the things that are understandable and stuff like that. And that's a great way to do it. But what it's interesting, as I was looking through this, what you've got very much like this hip hop sensibility of a remix, right? Of taking things that exist and mashing them together into making something, new. You're taking not only the text of the Constitution, but the illustration styles of these various artists, the comic book styles of these various artists.
I have to interrupt
and then
for
your own
just a
personal
second.
interests.
Bob, has anybody ever called you hip hop before?
No, but I have a deep affinity for that music, and I will talk about that. Please, Britton, finish your lovely.
Sure.
Your
Well,
lovely,
it's
oratory.
the notion of a remix culture, but even that remix culture is 30 years ago. If you look at what you're specifically doing, you already know this. I apologize for telling you things but you are making single panel pieces of work that are in a vertical format rather than horizontal. These are very much like TikToky. They're very, very modern in that sense, in a different way, expressing the Constitution. And I know a lot of this is just your personal artistic expression, but it also does fit this modern way of telling stories. This would not have been a sensible way to tell this 40 years ago, or certainly not 60 years ago, when people just weren't thinking this way. They weren't ready to change the channel with every panel, but you did. And probably a lot of these could be taken out of context completely and still stand on their own. The amount of text per page is comparable to the note at the bottom of an Instagram feed. It's a similar font style, which there were times when it would have been appropriate to change the font and you chose not to, so that it is a consistent format that sort of teaches you how to consume it as you consume it. It just feels very, very modern to me. It certainly feels, hip hop and remixy, but also the format that you chose to tell this story is very much like a scrolling feed of horizontal oriented images that mix things that already exist, mash it up with something that you're interested in, or mash it up with something that's different and expresses it the way that you were interested in expressing it. It's a as a format, it's extremely modern to me. It's a very, very modern way of using comic books to tell a very modern or to create a very modern piece of work.
That's fantastic, and I appreciate you saying all that. I had not made the connection to TikTok, but I see that now I see what you're saying for sure. But when you mentioned hip hop and you mentioned remixing, that is absolutely where I'm coming from. I was in art school in the '80s. I was listening to De La Soul, and I was listening to Public Enemy, and I was listening to the Beastie Boys, and I mean, De
And you
La
were listening
Soul,
to all that music before my people, the lawyers, got a hold of it. There was sort of a break in time.
a
I mean,
hundred
if you were in New
percent.
York, you were
It's
getting those cassette tapes,
it's a hundred
where
percent.
nobody could tell them not to do it because it was so underground.
I was listening to the De La Soul record that was not available for years because they used samples that were uncleared, and that first album, 3 Feet High and Rising, blew my mind. I just felt that I don't know. It somehow remade this work with so much affection and surprise and comedy that I just love that record. And then the density of Public Enemy and also the humor of the Beastie Boys and Paul's Boutique, which came out a couple years later, but was also just like them throwing everything into that mix.
That
Those
was still their best one, I think.
Probably. Yeah. I mean, that one hit me probably the hardest, although I like their later stuff too. But yeah, that was the one that kind of broke things open. I like the first record, but Paul's Boutique is astonishing. And it was more so in '89, I think, when it came out. So I definitely relate to that. I mean, I went to art school, so I was looking at John Cage and Rauschenberg and older artists who were collaging and reinventing the past and all the pop artists to a certain extent. So all that makes sense to me. I I guess it is modern in a certain sense, but it also seems maybe pre-modern too. I do see that. I guess I do see the connection to social media for sure. I guess the mixing, well, the availability of the variety of material is part of what made these books possible for me, and that is very much of the 21st century, late 20th century. The internet made a lot of this possible and easier for me, even though I was doing work sort of like this in the late '90s, but more so it's where we're at now. So yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Fun. It's really fun. And you also chose to draw in the styles of the artists. So I don't know if you know Alex Robinson, but the guy who created Box Office Poison, he similarly recreates comic book covers that he cherishes but they'll show Teddy Roosevelt or his favorite historical characters or Trump or whoever, but he tends to recreate those images in his own style rather than, I'm looking at right now Ty Templeton's style for Superman breaking the chains and stuff like that. And it, it feels like a really daunting task to try to imitate the styles of all of these different creators.
It is. I come from also, I mean, speaking of pre-modern, I also come from the tradition of Mad Magazine and the early artists that worked there, like Will Elder.
Do
And
any of your pages serve as a fold-in to reveal a new image, like in Mad Magazine?
I have not done a fold-in yet.
He says yet.
Yeah.
Have
Well,
you
let's see.
not done a fold-in period, or have you just not done a fold-in
I've
in
never
these
done
books?
I've never done a fold-in. I've never done a fold-in.
Oh,
I haven't done a Jaffe in any case. But yeah, I mean, when I think back to like those early Mad days, like they were really trying to replicate the styles. And I think maybe it's just my obsessiveness. Also, I never really enjoyed my own style, just in terms of my when I would make finished work that wasn't kind of a parody or homage. I always felt it felt a little weak to me, and I feel like being able to sort of like stand on the shoulders of giants or something makes my work better. So if I can actually kind of replicate the styles, I think it makes the work richer. And I mean, I hope people recognize when you see all these together, you kind of understand the conceit, which is it's all these voices coming together. One at a time, it might sort of seem like, hey, why did you rip off this one artist? But that's not the point. The point is to have them next to each other. So that goes back to the remix in a way. It's like having them all bumping up next to each other. That's the excitement for me. And I think if they were all my own style, it just wouldn't feel as special, and might not get that point across that I wanted to get over. But I like bootleggy versions of characters that are off model, and
Me
I mean
too.
the new Nancy strip, the new Nancy strip is really interesting because it's clearly Carolyn Cash's drawing, and I really like all her work, and to sort of see her sort of do this like kind of very punk version of Nancy is very funny, and not it wouldn't have occurred to me to do that, but I really enjoy how idiosyncratic it is, which is the kind of the inverse of Bushmiller's style. In some ways, I think her jokes have Bushmiller qualities, but the rendering is very much her own. So, I mean, that's a different kind of remix, I guess. And I mean, I enjoy that too. It's just that's just not my way.
Um, I want to call out something that I appreciate in terms of what you do, and then kind of ask if anybody has specific pages that stood out to them kind of in this way. And I'm going to use one of the more obvious examples. It, I like how oftentimes the artwork will really kind of highlight something that may be overlooked in the text, particularly if like you sit with the artwork. And I'm going to use two similar examples. In Emancipation Illustrated, when you get to the except the 48 counties designated as West Virginia and also the counties of Berkeley, blah blah blah, the places where there isn't emancipation, you've got this smiling, it's from K Chronicles, and you got the smiling white guy and the like rolling eyes uh black guy. I forget the name of the character from the K Chronicles off the top of my head. Similarly, um, for the 13th Amendment, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. And while you have chains being broken, it's Luke Cage who, of all the superheroes out there, is most famously one that has spent time in prison and therefore would have been allowed to be a slave. Um, so like again, these are a couple of more obvious examples of like how the art can not only go along with the text, but sometimes go along with, oh, this, there's some subtext here, or there's some text that people tend to gloss over when they think of this, and let's draw that out. Um, so like, I encourage any of the rest of the people, if you have pages that did for you, to think of them and share them. But B, Bob, like how much thought goes into, oh, this doesn't quite say what a lot of people think it says, or this section is the very lawyery, hey, we're doing this, except we're not totally doing that. Um, how much thought do you put into like, oh, I really want to pull that forward, and how much of it is you're doing jazz, you're riffing, and this felt good, and it just kind of shows up there.
Well, that's a good question. Between the two books, there's like over 200 artists and 200
Right.
pages. So sometimes it's maybe more conscious, and other times it's more like, well, this kind of fits. I think this will fit, and I talk myself into it as I draw it. But I mean, it was a long process of sort of finding the different artists, trying to like again make sure I cover the scope of artists and the timeline and the diversity of artists was really important to me. So sometimes it was like, this is pretty good, and this illustrates part of it. That you got all that from the Luke Cage page is great. I think you expressed it more coherently than I would have, but that's all in there, and that's great. I think that a reader's associations to the characters may deepen, hopefully not contradict, hopefully deepen the echoes that are there. So certainly the Keith Knight one, and a lot of the more lawyerese talk in the Constitution and Emancipation is very funny to me, because it is very, there's lots of accept this, accept that, not accept this, don't forget this, like this doesn't count, this counts, and I'm amused by that verbosity, which is antithetical to what many people think about comics, but I actually have come to really like overwritten comics, because I think there's something very funny and counterintuitive about that. It's not the way I would write comics, but there's something amusing about that juxtaposition. So the Keith Knight drawing for that was a natural, because it is very compromised. And to at least have one character rolling their eyes during some of this is great.
I'm curious to Julie and Ryan, what if you hadn't really been hadn't I'm currently studying for the bar in California. I'm a New York lawyer, but I'm trying to get my California license, and so I'm very familiar with the Constitution right now in a way that is really unpleasant. And Tad obviously is reading it all the time, and R has been drawing it for a while. But you guys maybe only are revisiting the Constitution for the first time in a while because it was illustrated, or the Declaration, or the Emancipation Proclamation. I'm curious, as you've looked at it, what things, big or small, kind of stood out to you that were illuminated about the Constitution, just because you hadn't read it in a while. Or Constitution, Declaration, and Emancipation Proclamation, all of it.
And the Gettysburg Address.
And Gettysburg Address.
Well, for me, I grew up on Schoolhouse Rock.
Great. Me too.
So, yeah, we knew kind of a little bit of that stuff, but I don't think I'd read it since high school civics class. That being said, none of it really stood out, in terms of the text. But my whole game was really the juxtapositions of the text, with picking out, thematically appropriate illustrations. And I thought that certain ones hit the nail right on the head, like the Freak Brothers one. That was I thought that was really spot on. I can't remember what, wasn't that the part where they're talking about standing armies?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I'm playing from memory here, so unreliable at best. But that one really hit the nail on the head for me. I thought the Buddy Bradley one was really good, and I thought Bag would probably appreciate that himself if he sees it. He's a big libertarian.
I know.
Yeah. So I think that he's probably read the whole thing many times over himself. And I think he would get kind of a kick out of that. And I just think, all those times with Buddy raging at the world are always just so perfect, I mean, nobody draws that kind of thing better than he did. And then I'm trying to remember what the Mark Beyer one was, but I think it was when they were talking about, despotic overlords type of thing, the abuses of, and I thought that the exact wording eludes me. You'll have to forgive me, but I thought that the nature of his overlordish characters and how truly alien they kind of are really hit the mark on the head with that one.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. That page
I
has.
can't help but sound totally ignorant, and I apologize.
No,
you're not sounding ignorant at all.
If I try to pull up the imagery and do the zoom, everything slows down on me.
No, that's totally fine. You got all three. You got all three correct. Not that you're being graded on this, but you pinpointed them very accurately. I was just going to say the one part of the Mark Beyer page that I chose there's a line that says a long train of abuses and usurpations, and that seemed to really reflect the series of events that happens to the characters in Mark Byers comics, where there's a
Oh
long
yeah,
series,
God.
long train of abuses. That seemed like spot on for his character's experiences.
Yeah,
Um,
that's Amy and Jordan in a nutshell.
yeah. But thank you for those. I that's the you're speaking of the era that I would assume you'd be familiar with, the 80s and 90s work. So that was great.
Mom's back.
Yeah, my phone overheated.
Oh no. Sorry.
And,
You you were using your phone rather than your computer?
yeah, I can't get my computer to do what it needed to do.
Gotcha. That's fair.
And my tablet doesn't do this anymore. So
Oh, we'll have to work on that the next time I'm out. Let's see if I
thank
can
you.
make it work for you. Tablet you can bring this way, but the computer I'll see what I can do next time I come out.
Mhm.
But so did you have any pages that stood out to you? Is kind of where we were at? Anything that you looked at differently on this read because of the art that went along with it?
Well, yeah, I got to get up there.
So we don't have too much dead air. I will also say that one of the
Yeah.
pages that I appreciate the most is the arguing snowmen from Calvin and Hobbes for Article 5, because it's like, yes, you can change this, but my God, is it going to be a crazy comedy of errors to do so?
Well, it's such a pleasure when you have to draw a crowd scene to realize, oh, they could all be snowmen.
Snowmen.
After 100 pages of people arguing, it's like, well, some of them don't have to be drawn in the Milt Gross style. That actually is in another page. But in this
Right.
case, I can just do snowmen and keep it relatively simple. Just change their hats.
Right.
I mean, Calvin has a lot of situations that probably would apply to these books.
Yeah.
But that one stuck out for me.
I thought it was fun putting myself in your shoes, imagining, which artists would I have chosen to put in, and which, mostly these were what I recognize as comic book covers. Which images would I have chosen as representative of that artist? And then thinking about, okay, I wonder why R made these particular choices. And it really stood out to me in a sequence that wasn't too far apart. You had two different covers that had the white original hero being fighting with and essentially losing to the black replacement hero. So you had
Mm.
Hal Jordan laying on the ground in the fist of John Stewart, and then a couple of pages later, you have Tony Stark and James Rhodes, fighting each other. At least that's what I think was going on in the Iron Man
Right.
one.
That's right. I forgot that was Jim Rhodes, but you're correct. I was just like, oh, two Iron
Yeah.
Man fighting. Great. I
That's
wasn't
hilarious.
but you're right. It must have been Rhodes. I'd have to go back and read that issue. But yeah, that was a case of like seeing the cover and going, oh, that will work for these purposes.
Yeah, but because when many people look back on the Constitution and our founding documents, and especially the Civil War era stuff, post Civil War, race was obviously the nation's original sin and was what sort of created the second iteration of America post Civil War. So when I think about these foundational documents, I do think about race a lot, which means then that when I'm looking at, a cartoon, your work, I'm conscious of when there are minority characters in
Mhm.
in the works, because I know that that's not who a lot of the foundational documents were really thinking about, and women especially as well.
Right.
And you seem to very consciously make some of those choices. So I don't know. I was just kind of curious to see about how you considered race as you picked the representative images that you were going to use in your work.
Well, in the Green Lantern page, you mentioned the John Stewart and Hal Jordan lanterns facing off. Like that was 100% part of the choice. I found myself there's so many he's, there's so many pronoun he in the Constitution that I sometimes got lulled into using male characters. I was like, wait, there should be some women in here. So I do remember in the same section that you're talking about, near the end of the Constitution, I made a point of making sure Fred Flintstone and Wilma are talking about the succession of the presidency, and Doctor Strange and Clea are talking about the succession of the presidency, because I was like, these characters are, I keep drawing male characters for the president, and I have to stop doing that. So I was kind of embarrassed when I realized I had done that a couple of times in the book where I didn't have, again, I think it's all the he's, but I can't say it's strictly that. We haven't seen the alternate world yet, but you want to put that in the book. You want to, especially in the case of the Constitution, I wanted to make sure, like I said before, I wanted people to see themselves in this document. It is a document that is alive and is changing. It's like, let's make sure there's diverse visuals in here. And I think I could have done a slightly better job, but I think the new book helps with that, because I made even more efforts to make sure that I tried to get different voices in there. Um, so hopefully that comes across. It was definitely something I was thinking about.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I'm
it
glad.
makes you think about it too, because like, we can all read as well and see all the he's and know that we're talking about white men and stuff like that. But then over time, as the law has been interpreted and evolved, we know that those terms now apply to men and women, and they apply to people of different races and things like that. And so
Or should.
no, they do. I mean, they do. And so they appropriately are represented by people who may not have been contemplated at that time, because the present of the Constitution of the Declaration of Independence, it includes the rights of all of those people, even if that's not who was in the originally made explicit. It is now. And so a modern document illustrating the Constitution, Declaration, and Emancipation Proclamation and Gettysburg Address should show them, because everybody gets those protections, whether or not they were considered at the time.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, and that's what I, my regret about these books is that I don't have characters from the future. I mean, I really was like, I wish I could have some characters from 2050 in here, because these are going to feel dated in 20 years. But someone else should redo this book in 20 years and do a new version. And they don't have to do this. They don't have to do my idea of it, but they could. They could do anything they want. But
Hey, wait, wasn't Reuben Flagg in there somewhere though?
yes, he was. What was that reference?
That's still the future in my book.
Oh, that's true. Thank you so much. That's absolutely right. I forget what years those two. What year did that take place? It might have only been 2030.
That sounds about right.
Can't remember, but good.
It's right around the
point.
corner.
Good point. Good point. All right. Yeah, I forgot about that. Thank you. Yeah, that might be the only few. There might be other sci-fi in there. I have to double check. But thank you,
Mom,
Ryan.
did you find the page you were looking for, or no? Okay. Then I'm going to direct a question towards Brit, because you're deeply immersed in this as you study for the bar again, and because the law. I mean, even before studying for the bar again, like the law has been a major part of your entire adult life. It's what you do. Was there anything that you looked at all differently, and or were there pages where you went, damn, that's spot on?
There were fewer, because I'm really thinking about it in a modern sense, and I'm also when you study for the bar, they specifically direct you to certain topics and avoid others. So, for example, my legal career has largely been about copyright and trademark are not tested on the bar. So it's useless to me. When I got to that provision, I think it's Section 1, Paragraph 8, or I forget how they even designate it, where they establish patent and copyright rights. It says it protects the sciences and useful arts. So if you're thinking about copyright and trademark, you're like, oh, science, that sounds like patent, and arts, that sounds like copyright. And it's actually the reverse. Sciences are considered the things that elevate the mind and move the abstraction of liberal thought forward. So that includes treatises and creative things that enrich the mind. Whereas useful arts are things like a plow, and things that you can use, useful arts, and so that's more like an invention. So it's funny that, like, to the modern ear, even if you know that that's where the rights lie, the into understanding of the words aren't necessarily the same. That gets made specific when you see choose spelled Chuse, when you see commas in weird places, because maybe they were trying to capture the way it was spoken out loud in the room rather than what we currently think of as grammatically proper. Um, And so just kicking around those kinds of things were fun. I was more interested in um, who made the cut, who I think was cool. When finally I saw Chris Ware, I was like, good, okay, he's in there. And but also thinking like, yes, but he did Quimby Mouse instead of my favorite character or whatever. And I was like, oh, I wonder if he drew it by hand like Chris Ware, or did he use Illustrator? Those kinds of things about the art side and about the legal side. There was like the 3/5 compromise, where there's this phantom person. I know of that from, history, studying history, but that is not a present thing in the law, and certainly not in my legal practice. That's an artifact, that historical thing that's now gone. Um, it is, illustrative of the shenanigans that people try to pull off with electoral politics and counting votes and things like that. But it, in itself, is not particularly current. It is more historical. It's more about learning about the document rather than using it today. But those were conversations that were going on in my head as I looked through it, a little bit more with an eye towards, oh, okay, that's right. Maybe this drawing will help me remember that the Fifth Amendment does this and the Sixth Amendment does that, because I know I'm going to get tested on it.
Well, that's great. I hope it helps.
I hope so too.
Very exciting to me to hear that you might be using it as a study guide. That's fun. Yeah, again, you brought up a lot of interesting stuff there. I would say, in terms of who was in it and who wasn't in it, a lot of it came down to what could I possibly shoehorn into this page, or what is a natural connection that I can make between the art and the text. There were a lot of artists I didn't get to include. I certainly I included a lot of favorites, but I also left out a lot of favorites just because I couldn't figure out how to fit in name your favorite artist. I have a long list of people I just could not fit in, ran out of pages, ran out of text, or just the text was like, I might have had a notion for something. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I might have had a notion for a character, but there wasn't a piece in the text that was appropriate for it. Occasionally something would hit me like a lightning bolt, but other times less so. The Chris Ware page you mentioned was one of the later ones, and it just worked out, and I was like, oh great, I got Chris in here. It was exciting to me to do it, but I can't get in everyone, unfortunately. Now the other thing you said about you mentioned something else. Oh, well, you mentioned the 3/5 compromise, which again, I like that I had to address it and keep it in the book, even though it is not relevant anymore. But I thought, no, this is part of the history. And in a way, I'm glad we don't put out a new constitution that just cuts out pieces. I felt like it was important to show that's where we started.
Yeah, in my world, that in particular is useful because so we're looking at the Constitution and these foundational documents. I'm thinking specifically about the Constitution just because I don't get tested on the Emancipation Proclamation for the bar, or the Declaration. But for the 3/5 compromise in particular, for anybody who's listening who doesn't know, this is where they were trying to figure out how to dole out representative votes in Congress and in the election of the president based on population of a state, but the states that had slavery, that allowed slavery to be legal, had more non-citizens, and so they wanted credit, I guess, for, but I'm doing finger quotes, for credit for having those people, and And the other states said, that's ridiculous. They're slaves. That's not appropriate at all. So they said, how about 3/5? And they said, all right, fine. It's called the 3/5 compromise. And that has now been, the Constitution's amendments changed that so that it's, one person, one vote, and that's how it goes. And that those people are able to vote. But what it does do is it reminds us of who the people were writing those words 250 years ago, because we currently look at other modern statutes and try to test their constitutionality based on the words of those people. And if we sort of think of them as men chiseled out of granite, that were right all the time and infallible, then we are less likely to question their foundational words that we're basing these laws upon. Whereas if we recognize them as humans and flawed and sometimes even wrong and sometimes horrifically wrong, then we can look at the foundational documents with a different eye as saying, okay, well, what is useful and illustrative rather than what is pedantic? And there'll be plenty of people who disagree with me, by the way. I'm not saying that I'm right. I'm saying, but this is how I feel, that there's an elasticity.
I'll say
that,
you're right. And yes, there are
well,
people who disagree with
I'm
you.
sure the people on this call, probably. I don't imagine Tad is inviting people who, feel radically different than him. But there are people out there, and they are also Americans, and they deserve to have their thoughts
They do.
heard, and respected. And so, especially voters, not necessarily the politicians who are espousing them. And to recognize the value of the elasticity of the document and the thought that went into it and the values as the better, how can we use this document to make our country better, rather than pedantically say like, well, these are what the letters of the word say, and this is how I'm telling you, what they meant. So the door is now closed and there is no debate. I don't find that to be very useful. I think it's
Well, and
you could consider it, but it's not persuasive to me.
you're touching on one of the things I love about these books is that there is a huge swath of the country, no matter what they think of the specific words of the Constitution or the Declaration or whatever, have always viewed them as impenetrable, haven't even necessarily tried to read them because they think that they're too long and all sorts of things that is based on just bad assumptions, not like so the fact that you know you have all of this in like an inch worth of comic books with like a paragraph per page, I think makes it that much more accessible to anyone. I told Bob on the last conversation, and I'll repeat it again, where I fell in love with this book was after watching a clip of Jordan Klepper from January 6th, where he was talking to this 20-something-year-old guy near the Capitol, and the guy's going, what they did was unconstitutional. It's like, really? Like, where in the Constitution? Well, I don't know. They just said, well, I've read you've read the Constitution. Yeah, it's a remarkably short document. You've read the Constitution? Yeah, you should maybe look into it because I feel like you're about to like commit sedition. And, like that just stuck in my head so much because again, like, yes, I know I'm an autistic weirdo. I own it. But like I've read the Constitution at least once a year, every year since I was 12, and it's never felt like this big burden. At 12 it was kind of hard, but like at 13 when we actually had to study it for eighth grade and learn about it, it became easier. And every year after, I mean, it's like there are certain things that I read every year, around either the 4th of July or Election Day or Inauguration Day is when I'll read the Constitution and generally the Declaration. Around President's Day, I'll generally read Lincoln's second inaugural and the Emancipation or the Gettysburg Address, and around Martin Luther King Day, I'll read Letter from Birmingham Jail and I'll read the I Have a Dream speech, and none of them are that long. We're talking maybe an hour out of my day on any given one of those days to read that stuff. So like when I hear that people think that it's so impenetrable that they haven't even tried, it's like I really appreciate that now I have this fun version to hand to somebody and say, well, here, try it. Try it.
I have a question for you, if I can ask it. So,
Sure.
this is going to get a little bit political, but the Second Amendment is you illustrated the page that has the Second Amendment. You chose the cover of GI Joe #1, I believe,
Yeah,
and
very good.
it shows a bunch of GI Joe looking guys, but they're dressed in tricorner hats, and they're jumping off of a giant cannon instead of what I'm assuming is a tank in the original. And it's very explosive and dynamic and energetic and stuff. I don't know if this falls into the sort of Kirby clone type stuff. But today on the front page of the New York Times, it says the current administration rolls back dozens of gun regulations. So this is a hot topic currently for most of our lives. It has been the sort of tension between the Second Amendment, which roughly suggests that it's important that people can arm themselves, and the belief by a lot of people in modern times that guns should be better regulated than they maybe were back in that
Well, this
time.
is this is where I'm going to actually jump in and say, like, the idea that guns should be regulated is in the Second Amendment, and it's only in modern times that we've started to have trouble with it.
It is. I agree with you that it is a document that, or it's an amendment that has been troubled in its interpretation, and that there are good people on both sides of the
Well,
thing.
but
In any
but
event,
seriously,
I have
Britt,
found.
you're a lawyer. The
Let me
first.
step in with lawyery
Okay,
stuff.
yeah, yeah.
I disagree, I disagree with the. I believe there should be more and better regulation. I do happen to think that the current Supreme Court analysis of the Second Amendment has been largely correct based on how it is written and the way the people who wrote it felt about it. I disagree with it, meaning I substantively I disagree with it, but textually, I unfortunately think that the amendment says what they say it says. You and I may disagree, totally fine.
That's a much longer conversation,
The
but
question
yeah.
to R, yeah, the question to R is, to what extent was he thinking about that when he chose the GI Joes and sort of celebrating guns on that page rather than celebrating the regulation? Or I mean, I wonder if that one, R, was challenging for you as you approach the Second Amendment for those reasons.
It was challenging to me. Uh, that was an interesting page. I do try to give each page its due. As I said before, I wanted to represent everybody. I would say one thing about that page that I recall, and this was like 6 years ago that I drew that page, but I seem to recall thinking, oh, I'll use the Punisher. I wanted to have some over the top violence. I mean, it's sort of comically explosive, the image I was referencing. And I thought I could do something with the Punisher. And then I thought, well, wait a minute, this is about militias. So I should have a group. I shouldn't have a solo guy with a gun. And I was like, that's about as far as I got. I was like, all right, well, if you all want to look at this, it's like think about militias versus solo, standing ground guy in the next
Mhm.
Spider-Man movie, whatever
Right.
you would call him. Like let's make it about let's at least acknowledge the militia part of it. But
It is actually,
I hope that the comical, I mean, I'm sure it's not.
yeah.
You can't any war movie, I think I've heard this said, and I think it's true. I think any war movie is not an anti-war movie. You can't make someone suggested that you can't make an anti-war movie. Once you make a movie with people shooting guns, it's like it's pro-war. I kind of agree with that. Apocalypse Now is a lot of things, and I don't know. I'm sure people watch that movie go like, yeah, I want to go fight. And it's clearly not meant to be pro-war, but there's some pretty glorious explosions in that movie. And so I could have chosen something different. I decided to go with something bombastic and over the top. Yeah, I agree with you, Britt. But I didn't, but that's what I settled on for that page. But there was a push and pull with that page in particular, for sure.
Did you have a similar push and pull with any pages in the Declaration book?
Well, there's that line about the indigenous folks, which that's not the term they use when they describe them in the Declaration, but that page was kind of nauseating. Um, so I ended up using a very restrained style from the 30s. It's the strip called White Boy, ironically, and it is a fairly sympathetic representation of American Indians or indigenous Americans. It's a fairly sympathetic representation of them, told from the viewpoint of a white boy, but I thought I could at least do something pretty. And if you see the characters that are looking at each other in that page, hopefully you'll sort of sense that there's more going on than just these are savages that we have the right to eliminate. That's not exactly what it says, but it does call them savages. And that made me super queasy. And I perhaps could have done something that was a more overt commentary. But again, I think if you see the dynamic of the characters, you'll appreciate what I'm going for there. But it's maybe more subtle than it needs to be for something that's so like explicitly racist and you could argue explicitly colonialist. What's the word I'm looking for? Empire building, because it's basically saying we want this land and the Brits are keeping us from it and these other people. So anyway, that was a troublesome page, but I don't really know what I could do on that page without changing the text that would make me feel better about it. It's a really unpleasant part, but it's woven in the story, and it's like what you were saying before, Britt. These are not larger than life gods. These are compromising and compromised men writing these documents. So it's part of the story. And I want to acknowledge that if you get past the fun parts about all are created equal and we have these rights, then you get to the harder stuff toward the end.
I'm gonna jump back to the Second Amendment page just for a minute because
Uh-oh.
it's one of my favorite pages, and I told you about this the very first time we talked about it. Because they're dressed as colonial Minutemen, it absolutely acknowledges the original intent, which was there wasn't supposed to be a standing army. We needed to have the ability to protect communities. They weren't comfortable completely yet with a strong government, so they needed like one of the concessions to the states was the idea that you'll have your militias. If you have to rise up against us, we won't prevent your ability to do so. But then it was also G.I. Joe. It wasn't like Joe Kubert's war stories or whatnot. So like you've got the historic Minutemen real militia mixed with what makes me just think so much about people out in the woods playing army, that has become so much of what gun rights have become is I get to go pretend that I'm whatever. There isn't that same level of seriousness to what many of the people making the arguments today have. So that's always actually been one of my favorite pages because I felt like it really well set up the argument surrounding the Second Amendment, and what its meaning is, and like it's gone through separate meanings, until 2008. Pretty much every time it came up in the Supreme Court, they leaned heavily on the well-regulated militia. Bruin and forward, it's shall not be infringed. So like on every level, there has been debate over that amendment. I mean, like the NRA went from a organization that helped write gun control legislation to an organization that doesn't believe in any of it. And that happened when there was essentially a takeover of their major conference in, I want to say, 1977 in Cincinnati. Everybody just showed up and voted the other way.
They were all for gun control when the Panthers were arming up.
Exactly.
They
Ronald Reagan signed off on the strictest piece of gun control legislation ever put forth at the state level in the United States because it had to do with disarming the Black Panther Party.
Yeah, and the one gun control thing in recent decades that the NRA sat on the sidelines and did nothing about was when they banned Saturday night specials, which legally disarmed the poor. You know,
Right.
you can't get cheap firearms anymore unless you get them illegally. It's a
Right.
crock, man.
So I mean, it is a fascinating one, but I think you perfectly threaded the needle on that, where you did the hat tip for why it's there, and there are important reasons why it's there. There are unimportant reasons why it's there too. You know, the Southern slave owners were really big on being able to keep their guns. It's a lot easier for a couple of people to keep 100 people in bondage if the 100 people in bondage don't have the same firepower. Um, but it's also become a completely different world. You know, I don't think that any of the founding fathers could imagine an Uzi. Let's have this thing that we can put in your coat and pull out and fire 100 bullets a second.
They did tell us we're supposed to amend it. I mean, that was
Exactly.
and that we could amend it. And
And my response to Brit is like, if this Supreme Court is the right ruling, and I think it's fair to argue that, but if it is, that's what pushes me over the line to we need to repeal the Second Amendment and write something that makes more sense. You know, because it's just ridiculous how little. I don't know. And actually, this is a question I've always wanted to ask a lawyer. So particularly because you're studying the bar right now. How
what do
are
you
we
think of
supposed
Wolverine? Who's stronger, Wolverine?
Well, that too. No. This is a more general question, Bob. I'm leaving guns. I'm done with my gun. But how are
It
we
better have to
supposed
do with comics, though, Tad. That's all I'm saying.
Well, I mean, it's supposed to be both tonight.
Okay,
You got your whole episode that was all about comics.
Are you just watch? I'm going to bring it back to comics no matter what he says. We'll
I
get
know
there.
he
We'll get
will.
there.
He's good at that. He's good at that. But
I always have that on my mind.
how are we supposed to read the preamble? I've always thought of the preamble as like the lens through which you're supposed to read everything that follows. If you have questions about what this means, we need to go back to the preamble and think of what it means through that lens. But I don't feel like that's the way it's treated. And I don't know if that's just like a choice thing or like, is there a way that it's supposed to be treated? Because it's arguably the most beautiful paragraph in all of our founding documents. But I don't know that I always feel that it's treated as important. So I mean, is that my hallucination? I mean, yeah, yeah. How do you think the preamble is read? How do you think it should be read? That
It's a
sort of
mixed
thing.
bag, right?
Because
So,
yeah,
I'm a lawyer, so the answer is a little bit of this, a little bit of that. On one hand, what's the saying? I wish I could find a one-handed lawyer because I'm so sick and tired of hearing on one hand, on the other hand. There's a
no, we have
specific
more
example that
eight-handed lawyers than
well,
one-handed
it can feel
lawyers.
like it, yeah. So today I was literally studying some of this language, which was provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, because that defines the powers of Congress. Is Congress allowed to pass this law? Well, one of the tests they have to do is does it fit into one of the things that's the purpose of giving them power in the first place? And part of that purpose is to provide for the general welfare. Now that's been interpreted very, very broadly. So that's why Congress can do so many things. The mechanism for doing it, as we learned from, I think it's the 10th Amendment, that federal government can't boss around the states, right? But they can incentivize the states. They can say, well, if you'll do such and such, we'll give you this tax money. So they do have the right to tax and to spend, but they don't have the right to command. And so they can command or they can tax and spend for the purpose of promoting the general welfare. So that's where, something that becomes important. I tend to think of the Declaration of Independence as something we should be looking at a lot, which is especially for pursuit of happiness. I think that that's a really, if you look at where does a nation derive its power, it's from the foundational documents that everybody signed off on. And one of them says that the pursuit of happiness is part of what should be the goal of having a nation. And I just don't think that, especially in modern discourse, we don't really think about the importance of happiness as much as we should. So, to answer your question, Ted, there's an element of in contract law, especially, that the titles don't really mean anything. Like we can call this section, police power or something like that. But then if the actual text of the designating the power doesn't say anything about police power, well, then the heading doesn't mean anything. And I think the preamble, in some ways, can be ignored, and in some ways ends up being an important part of the foundational power of it. Kind of in the same way that, like, when you're reading a comic book under Jim Shooter, every comic book is somebody's first. And so there will be that introductory paragraph that says, "I'm Wolverine, I'm the best there is at what I do." And you don't need that. That doesn't necessarily tell you the story, but it is helpful background information to help you understand the story. So that's largely where I look at the preamble. I agree with you. It's a beautiful piece of prose. It's probably one of the things that it lends power to the more boring stuff and legalese stuff that comes later. And it's important.
Jim Shooter thinking to be in a thought bubble that Steve Rogers is thinking that recaps the last 9 issues in like 3 panels.
Yes, yeah, but that's the principle. But in theory, if you're following like the Marvel method, you should be able to just look at the images and tell the story, right? Yeah, and like understand what's going on, and everything else is just kind of color that helps you maybe put it in context. And I think that's in large part what the preamble is doing, and at some level what the Declaration of Independence is doing. It's saying we're free from England. It doesn't necessarily have any legal force in America, but it is, because it's so important. It's the thing that pulled us all together. You would look at that to find out what are the principles we're trying to get at in this later document. All right, so I wove comic books in there a little bit, Ted.
You did great.
Oh,
You did
and
great.
you know what? Here's the other thing I wanted to say too. You have the quote from that wonderful quote from Ben Franklin on the back of the book.
I love that.
Listening.
I needed to include that. It's basically
neat,
him
dude.
hedging.
Yes. Yeah. But you know what? It's also him sort of recognizing the imperfection, capturing, like you had said, that at some point you hate that you don't like having to compromise, but unfortunately, that's sometimes what you need to do. And so
it was actually from the Ben Franklin speech
and that's
that I
the
was
Ben Franklin
talking about
quote
earlier. Right.
Yeah, and you chose several similar quotes on the back where George Washington seems to really not like it very much.
Yeah.
But a truism also in a lawsuit or in legal stuff is that if both sides are unhappy, you're probably pretty close to right. And so that's a good compromise, because there's the idea that if you have an adequate legal system, it delays war. It prevents people from just killing each other in the streets, because that's why our court system is so important. That people feel like they have this fair hearing. That they have this feeling of justice, and so those guys were politically savvy. Franklin knew what he was doing. He was talking to the French, and he was talking to the British. And he was talking to the local press in Philly, and he was talking to the Virginians that he just buttonholed to get them to agree to this language. So if he went out and celebrated and said, "Yeah, this is the perfect document," then maybe those Virginians would be upset. But if he says, "Oh, I'm upset," he's fainting. He's doing a little bit of Muhammad Ali, pretending that something is true just to achieve his goal. That's some of what certainly a savvy player like Ben Franklin was able to do. He was doing the same thing all over the world throughout his life. It was figuring out what do people need politically in order to advance the goals that he thought were appropriate. So some of that in the language of the Declaration, especially, but I think probably also in the preamble of the Constitution. Franklin had this notion that we shouldn't lean too heavily on God, because maybe there's going to be division that comes from that. Let's use the same concept, but make it less explicitly religious. And as a result,
recently
came
learned
with the new poetry.
The one that changed it to "we hold these truths to be self-evident" rather than something more. I forget what Jefferson's original.
These are the truths that God gave us, or something like
right,
that.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly. I think we might be listening to the same podcast, by the way.
Yeah, to lean in on the reason rather than the
which was a political choice that he made.
Yeah.
They were talented.
No, I mean, I think anybody who wholly discounts like the founding fathers for being intelligent and forethoughtful and whatnot isn't paying attention. But I also think that like anybody who gets into the strictly textual, strictly historical is like willfully ignoring parts of the text. Because like again, if you think you're making a perfect document, you don't make it amendable. If you think you got all of the rights down, you don't need a Ninth Amendment to say, hey, just because we didn't enumerate it doesn't mean it's not still a right of yours. You know, I mean, there are things in the text itself, never mind the writings and the speeches around the text, but there too, that make it clear that it's like we're doing something that we understand is new. We think we've gotten a lot of things right. We're not certain that we'll feel that way 10 years from now. So like we'd like, at least if we're not Jefferson, to be able to change it without bloodshed. Jefferson actually like made statements about how we should re-sanctify it in blood, and I'm kind of glad that we've only done that once. I would like to not have to do it again. Like when you read about the Civil War times, they don't sound pleasant.
No.
And that's one of the beauty. Like we're a relatively young country, but like there aren't a lot of countries out there that have gone 250 years with only one major civil conflict. So in that sense, we're pretty impressive.
In other senses, less so.
Well, that's why in order to form a more perfect union,
Perfect union.
recognizing there is no perfect union, but we can
Right.
get more perfect.
Right. And that's one of the reasons that I ask about the preamble, because like that's part of the lens that I feel like you're supposed to be reading stuff through. I mean, that's part of the lens that I feel like you should be reading the Second Amendment through, is like, okay, like this text is imperfect. We need to think about why it's this text. We need to think about that time versus this time. You know, no standing army that time, standing army this time. Maybe a great compromise is you want to be able to play like guns like this? Fine, you're in the National Guard. You don't want to play with guns like this? You don't have to be in the National Guard. You know, I mean, but yeah. Again, I love that what you've done, Bob, is create two books that not only encourage us to look at all this stuff again, but give us a way to look at it with some humor. Look at it from possibly a fresh perspective. Definitely talk about it on more levels than just wherever our grievances today. Which isn't something that we get enough of in the world right now. So I really appreciate it. Anybody else with last words before we wrap up?
No, I really had fun with that book, and I hope you find a way to do something else.
Thanks. Me too. Thank you. I appreciate it, and I appreciate your knowledge of these these subcultures of comics. So thanks.
Well, I will also toss out that Bob has done Masterpiece Comics,
Yep.
where he adapts classic literature into comic book form, specifically continuing his pastiche of various people. I'm a particular fan of Dennis the Menace, Prince of Denmark, and
Venice of Denmark.
I know. I wasn't naming it specifically as much as trying to let people know what it was.
Oh, I see. Sorry.
I
don't mean to step on you, Tad. I'm just
no. It's your book, so you're you know, and Charlie Brown, the metamorphized bug, waking up in the morning. That's almost as good as when he woke up as a baseball.
Your
But
Trump book might be due for a follow up. I mean, with the verbal diarrhea that guy puts out on a daily basis.
except that I just don't want Bob to have to do that.
No.
Thank you, Ryan. I one of the reasons I did the Constitution was because I couldn't bear to draw Trump again for a while. But I wondered if there was more to do with that. Um, it might seem quaint at this time. I don't know. But I certainly he continues to infuriate me in new ways every day. He's quite inventive.
I mean,
Um,
every once in a while he'll be quiet for a couple of days, and then he won't infuriate me more. But then he'll come back, and I'll discover that there are new depths.
Yeah.
I did. There was one thing I wanted to mention about the book that I was very happy to have this work out. Um, in the Emancipation, I included a page based on Hagar the Horrible.
Yep.
And I don't know if anyone caught this, but it's a shot of Hagar looking up into the heavens, and it's actually a reference to the comic strip that Joe Biden kept on his desk because he had a comic strip of Hagar speaking to the skies and saying, "Why me, God?" And God says, "Why not?" or something like that. I can't remember.
Okay.
But anyway, if Joe Biden was reading comics, he'd recognize this page. And then in the same document, I got a page from the Milestone comic Icon, which I don't know if any of you are familiar, but this was Clarence
Sure.
Thomas. Hmm?
Definitely.
I said very.
So it was Clarence Thomas's favorite comic. He would quote this comic, and it caused a lot of anxiety for Dwayne McDuffie, who wrote the comic, because he did not agree with Clarence Thomas's
I was about to
politics.
say, did Clarence Thomas like read the comic very well, or did he
Well,
only read like the
To
first
be fair,
issue?
Dwayne McDuffie also didn't agree with Icon's politics.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah.
true. That's true.
He's a very conservative hero. So I was happy to represent comics that are loved by
Right.
Thomas and Joe Biden in the same book. So
Right.
not
I
sure
mean,
what Obama's reading these days, but maybe he's in there too. I don't know.
yeah. Well,
I
do you
don't
have
think our
anything
current
from
president reads
March?
comics, which is maybe one of his flaws.
Did you do any of March in either book? Because I know Obama was a big fan of March.
I didn't. That was a possibility, but
Okay.
that might have broken open the space-time continuum or the multiverse if I put
That's
John
fair.
Lewis in the Constitution. I don't know, maybe it would have worked. I don't know. It seems like I'm asking for trouble in terms of
That's
keeping
true. That's true. It's
the uh,
fair.
the Thomas Jefferson of Earth 2 from showing up. Anyway, I know I'm mixing my metaphors. Sorry, it's been a long day.
No, that's what we do here. So thank
He's
you
got gray
all.
temples in his red hair. Otherwise he's the same.
Thank you all for joining us tonight. This has been the Joy, Resistance, Hope, and Survival Book Club on 22 panels, and we will see you after the next page.